This is a Balanced Brain podcast with your hosts, Melanie Nicholson and Sean Clift.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Balanced Brain podcast. My name's Sean Clift. I'm joined by my very good friend and co-host, Melanie Nicholson. And Melanie, I'm actually joined by you. How exciting, here on the beautiful Gold Coast.
Exciting, Sean. It's been 12 months we worked out.
It's 12 months, almost to the day since we've seen each other. So it's so good to see you. Here we are in an amazing apartment at the Gold Coast. It's beautiful here.
It's beautiful, overlooking the ocean. And yes, we've been separated by borders, but now we're here in person.
I know, unbelievable how much has gone on since we've seen each other. It's been a crazy year, hasn't it?
It has absolutely been a crazy year. In fact, it's hard not to lose track of time and think, oh, was that 2 years ago or was that 12 months ago? So yeah, I know that is how a lot of people are feeling about time. And it's just really interesting to see how it's going.
So how do you think people are coping at the moment? There just seems to be an overwhelming amount of things happening. You know, obviously COVID, we're in Australia here, particularly on the East Coast, particularly where I live up here in Brisbane and the Gold Coast area, ravaged by severe flooding. We've got war breaking out in Europe again. It's crazy, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is, Sean. It's almost like, and I was saying to you this morning, it's about your nervous system is just primed, ready for the next thing. And of course, the media creates a lot of that, but it's just needing to find those moments of just, I want to shut the world out, and I don't know what's around the corner, and it's really hard to keep that equilibrium at the moment, that balance.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
it just seems as though. Every time we sort of think that things are going in a certain direction or we're getting out of a certain situation, that the rules change and the goalposts move, and it's constantly evolving, isn't it? And I think it's a very stressful time for everyone.
Yeah, and something I would like to say about that, like I was heading up here, we've just driven from Newcastle, and I promised that I wouldn't put on the news, but I put on the news this morning, and I'd already just seen in New South Wales where they're talking about bringing mandates back in again, no singing and dancing, and I was like, oh my God, we've only had like a week of it. And I wish I hadn't
thought
done
that was going to be over.
So I wish I hadn't have done it, but then I guess the anxious part of my brain was like, okay, well, to be forewarned is to be forearmed, and how am I going to deal with that? Without actually just going, oh my God, I'm on my way to a week holiday. It was like just for a moment I was taken out of that, anticipating what was coming again. So I think that is where a lot of people are at, where you're like, I'm not really sure what's going to happen tomorrow. And it's, how do we deal with that?
Well, I mean, it's got to the stage where, a month or two ago, or even a few weeks ago, you'd be nervous booking a holiday coming up here.
Yeah, for sure.
The border could close, or the rules could change on how far you could travel. Yeah. It's been a very confusing time for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that it's a lot of people are really happy that a lot of things are opening back up, and wanting to enjoy that, and it's finding that balance between living in that moment and doing things that you haven't been able to do for a while, or see people you haven't been able to see for a while, but also, waiting for that what's around the corner. Yeah,
okay. And so, we've got issues around the ongoing mandates, particularly around the vaccine mandates, is causing a lot of anxiousness for people. Like I know that the first rollout here in Australia was heavily taken up, but the boosters are starting to get rolled out now. I think that's creating a little bit of anxiety out there. So companies are starting to look at mandating those and things like that, and there's a whole lot of information that's changed so much.
And the other thing too is, obviously as the state ministers and even the Prime Minister said, is our booster rate is low and it's slowing, and they actually want to get that up. And it's the anxiety about then how they're going to get that booster rate up, because we know what we did to get the first two up, and that was really to say, well, you won't be able to work, you won't be able to do this without the first two. So they're things that are going on.
Well, the information changed so much. We were told initially that get the vaccine, you won't get COVID and you won't spread it. Well, then that clearly changed.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people were very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they were very comfortable to say, well, okay, well, I'm really happy that if I take that, I won't get it, I won't spread it, and that'll be fantastic. Be able to protect my family, be able to protect my work colleagues, be able to protect my grandparents, all that sort of stuff. But it seems now that that's clearly not 100% accurate. So where do we go with these mandates ongoing? I can't see how we can just sort of keep ongoing this ongoing.
But just to create contradiction in that, there's also been in the last week a lot of companies that were going to mandate, and now they're going to court. You know, some people have gone to court to stop them, and they've reversed them just before they've got to court.
Right.
So we've got these different situations. So everyone is still experiencing a different situation where mandates may have been dropped this week, and then there's an incredible amount that are now being mandated or mandated for the booster.
Yeah.
So everybody is still going through, in some way or another, I guess, a feeling of a lack of control.
Yeah.
And I think that is what's come out when I'm talking to people. It's about, again, still not being able to plan, and not being able to plan things like weddings and just moving and travelling, and still getting overseas is a big problem. And you know, I think it's around 40% of Australians have family overseas. So
Yeah.
we're big travellers. We've got families spread out in the world, and we still have some of the biggest travel restrictions in the world. So everyday lives are still, no matter what your decision was to vaccinate or not, everyone's lives are still, they're still in flux. There's still things going on that are out of their control.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, now we are seeing mental health was a problem before COVID, but it's becoming extraordinarily difficult, and to the point where health professionals are coming out now saying we really need to talk about what has been created in the last 2 years, the impact on mental health. We already had that issue.
Yeah.
Then, you know, what is specific about COVID and what's been happening with mandates that is further contributing to those mental health issues?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've had sort of more anecdotal conversations with people that are just totally confused. You know, they're totally confused about, you know, the information that was given compared to what the actual reality of what's happened over the last, particularly in Australia, the last couple of months, has been very different to what the narrative was. And I think people are feeling confused as to about, well, okay, well, where do we go now? What can we rely on? What is accurate? What is real? It's getting more and more confusing by the day.
Well, and just on that, obviously with a lot that's going on overseas, particularly in Ukraine, our focus has been diverted off what was a court-ordered release of Pfizer documents around adverse events. And I think that has been covered a fair bit by independent journalists, and it is on social media platforms. I can see that it's been shared around. And there are people asking, like, why was this information not made available to me like any other medication or vaccine that I would have taken? And why did it take court action to have this information released, which is generally always available to me or my doctor to make those decisions?
Well, exactly. And what's confusing to me is that they're releasing 10,000 pages at a time over a period of, what is it, 6 or 7 months?
Yeah, it's right up to August. So, you know,
now those pages aren't even in order.
Yeah.
And the reason that they have given to say, well, there's so much information in there, if we release the whole thing, it's so much to go through. But how did it get approval so quick if they could do that?
And that's the comments I've been reading and hearing from people, particularly who trusted their own doctors. I mean, most doctors did give the vaccine here, and it was people own family doctors or doctors they'd been to for years.
Yeah.
And they put trust, of course you would, in your doctor.
Yeah.
And now they've found out that doctors have not even had that information because it only got released.
Yeah.
You know,
and like,
6 or
we're
7
not medical
days ago.
professionals, so we're not here to
No,
say whether
no.
you should or shouldn't have it. What I'm saying is that the information is so confusing. To have it retracted for 75 years and
Yeah.
then a court order coming out of the state and they release 10,000 pages at a time over a period of 7 months.
Yeah.
And then
just to
there's,
clarify
you
for
know,
our listeners, what Sean's referring to there is initially Pfizer had asked to withhold that information until 2075. And there was a lot of questions, even in the medical community, about why that would be. Like, why would you want to keep that information for so long? And of course, the court overrode that. And that is why the information is coming out for some of our listeners who may not know that. So,
well, it's you know, it should be available to us. It should be available for journalists and medical professionals to go through that information. It should be available for us to get given the facts. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and also it's interesting that this week that particularly, you know, we were talking about in the mining industry, even engineering firms and that have mandated the boosters just on the release of that information. And I think that would have been a great time for employees to hold off and say, well, let's have a look at some of the data that's coming through before we continue with further mandates.
Yeah.
Would that be I don't know if that's known to a lot of
Look, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, but I just think that, you know, with the reality of it, that it hasn't stopped the spread and it hasn't stopped people from getting it. Sure, it may have had a great impact on the hospitalisation rates and the death rate. You know, the statistics seem to be fairly clear on that, but I'm not too sure if the mandates can go on.
And that's not just something that affects. I mean, the thing is, we could not have known that mandates would have existed 12 months ago. So it's that unknown of how far do they go with mandates?
Well, the information changed, and this is my point. We were told we're not mandating. There will be no mandates in Australia, and then even up and really 6 months ago, we had the Prime Minister saying we don't have mandates in Australia. Well, we clearly do.
Yeah.
So that's confusing in itself. So then how do people go on? Well, then when do I need to have my next one? And then is there going to be another one after that? And is my workplace going to start to implement that? They've already done it in this workplace. So there's this constant sense of anxiety that I think people are really struggling with.
Yeah, and it's that overall feeling of nervousness. And again, what control do we have in our lives at the moment? It doesn't feel like we've been able to control anything for the last 2 years. Who we see, who we're connected with, where we travel. I mean, that has been for 2 years, even prior to vaccines coming on the scene. So we've had 2 years of this, Sean.
Yeah.
And that has to have some impact. And it doesn't matter if they say, oh, things are getting back to normal, then how do we talk about...
It certainly doesn't feel normal.
It doesn't...
Yeah. In many aspects it does. Like, you know, you kind of look superficially and things are quite normal. But I think people are still feeling that things aren't quite right.
Yes, and it may even just be that gut feeling, that intuition that, well, we can't really ignore what happened over the last 2 years because everybody had their lives impacted in some ways on a major scale. And, you know, I think we'd even talked about this in the last episode. There is trauma associated with that in some way, no matter, and it's at different levels for different people, depending on what your circumstance was. Because everybody was going through different life experiences even before this happened. So anyone who is already going through great changes in their life just before COVID, imagine going into that period already with that level of change going on in your life, whatever was happening for you at that time.
Yeah, well, look, I think that's the crux of the issue, isn't it? Is change. And you and I talked about this, and we said, well, we're going to catch up. We're here. We're going to meet up on the Gold Coast. We've got to do a podcast in person.
Yeah.
So we thought, well, what are we going to talk about? And we thought, dealing with change.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what's going on. So, Melanie, you did a little bit of research about it. What did you find? Okay, let's go through. So, you know, you've worked as a family counsellor, you've worked as a coach and a counsellor, and what's some advice and what's some information that you found on how people can deal with this constant change?
So, to me, the biggest one is, I would say to my clients, is to visualize certain outcomes and ask what's the worst that could happen from whatever choice you made, and to actually visualize that and feel what it felt like to make that decision. And taking you through the process of the worst case scenario.
Right.
And then knowing that you could cope with that in that situation if you wanted to visualize that, and then have strategies, preempted strategies that would help you deal with that if it actually came to that. And in most situations, this is where I think it's different now. We always tend to overestimate the worst case scenario, and it doesn't happen.
Okay.
So what I think...
Now, I think that's been amplified too over the last couple of years.
Yeah. So
every story is doom and gloom.
Yeah.
Every statistic's doom and gloom.
Yes.
And now we've got new doom and gloom. You know, another war breaking out. Looks like it could be, really bad, you know.
And that happened to coincide with kind of the ending of a lot of the restrictions here. And
it just seemed as though it was all getting better, and then we've got doom and gloom again. So I think you're right. It is really easy to go into that negative aspect.
That's right. And then that is not a normal pattern in the human life. You don't... Very rarely do we get continual hits,
Yep.
you know, like where you feel like you're on top of something, and then literally within 24 hours, and the news cycle has a lot to do with this. But before COVID, we would have things going on that people, even closest to us, may not have had any idea about what we were dealing with, because we tend to internalize a lot of and process a lot of feelings and emotions before we can actually verbalize them. But it's kind of like we don't have the time at the moment to go through and release emotions and feelings and trauma from each event that's happened over the last 2 years, because it just feels like, what's going to happen tomorrow? It's like going back to, you know, driving up here and feeling like everything's amazing, but then what are we going to go back to in a week's time in New South Wales? Now they're talking about restrictions again.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like, oh my God, we just had, you know, and that is, I think that would be a very common feeling.
Right, exactly.
Of not knowing that, and that is anxiety, that it's that anticipation of the next thing coming for you.
Well, Melanie, it's documented on this podcast, my battle with depression, and I know that you've had your battles with depression as well. And at the worst period of my depression, that's exactly what I felt. I was a very optimistic person before I suffered from depression. And then with me, when I was at the worst peak of my depression, everything seemed like a disaster. Every little hit was a big hit, because it just built up and built up and built up and built up until it was just so hard to take it anymore. And I think that advice on trying to visualize, you know, what's the worst that could happen, because sometimes that gets hard. So the more things happen, the harder it is to sort of get to that point of view. I think that's very, very good advice.
The other thing I would say that you can do on a physical level, so I think we look at I like to look at things from a physical, emotional, spiritual level. You know, we have to address all of that. And from a physical level, we look at what has not been taken away over the last 2 years.
Yep, okay.
And we always had the ability to get daily exercise, for example.
Sure.
Right? And we saw a big explosion in people wanting to get out in nature and connect that way.
Yeah, push bike sales went through the roof.
Yeah, so I think that we say to our brain, well, what was it that I could do in the last 2 years when everything else was restricted? And that was the ability to get outside. Right? In the sun and go for a walk. That wasn't taken away from anyone at any time. So that, and even for me personally, that's my go-to, is getting outside and going for a walk at the very least. So for me, that is a way that we can cope with ongoing change, is to keep our physical sense of self.
Yeah.
And continually go through having that regular connection with not just exercise, but physically going outside.
Absolutely.
And connecting with nature. I know that was very soothing, even for people who had never thought about it before in the last couple of years. So moving forward, when we're still in this really uncertain territory, it's looking back and reflecting on the last 2 years of where you could remain some constant habit in your life that was soothing, like a self-soothing.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah. I think there was a joke going around my neighbourhood that most of the dogs would get before COVID couldn't wait for someone to come and walk them, whereas a couple of months into COVID, they were saying, please just let me have a little rest.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I had thought about when we're going to talk about this is this trust issue, right? And trusting, my partner Aaron always says to me, everything's going to work out. And there are some people who have that optimism bias, and that we have to acknowledge that, where people really do think things will work out. And the truth is, and you would know, having both of us have gone through depression and anxiety, that is actually the advice a therapist would give you, that in the end things have a way, or you manage to find a way to work them out.
Yeah, well, the way that I sort of have looked back on it now is that I always thought to myself, if I just do this, I'll get back to the same person that I used to be. But that never happened. I actually came out of it a different person, but I'm not so sure that it was such a bad thing.
Can we talk about that, becoming a different person? Because that is something that I am hearing from people, is how much they have changed in the last 2 years from this, and whether that is to do with a decreased trust in authority, or people that they used to trust that they no longer trust, or their assumption that they held about things or beliefs have been challenged.
Sure.
And I think the belief system is a big part of that, believing that...
Well, I think so as well. And I think that sometimes being forced into a change makes you do something different. And I think we've seen that. I think people have sort of moved away from, their have a career change, or they've moved away from into a different job, or they've moved out of the city into the country, or they've moved closer to the ocean, or they've moved closer to nature. And that this constant sort of change that's happened over the last 2 years has really forced people into reevaluating. So you can look at that, as well as sometimes when you get in your comfort zone and you're just going through the routine every day and you're not really being challenged, sometimes these big changes can make you look for an opportunity.
Yeah, and it's something that, when you just mentioned that, then I know that employers are having a huge problem getting people back to the office, into the cities.
Yep.
And you can completely understand that. Like when, as you said, when change is forced on you, you may not have thought too much about how much the daily commute or going into the CBD was affecting your mental health, or your physical health, or your time with your family. And now people are like, hang on, I can do my job from home. I can have family time.
Well, some people can do it from home.
Some people can. And
a lot of people can't.
And that is the important thing. And some people may have realised that too. They may have had that dream of working from home. So that's the other side. And then they've realised, actually, that doesn't work for me. So again, that is a massive change that's happened for a lot of people. But now there's talk about how do we balance that? Can we have 2 days in the office and 3 at home?
Exactly.
And so balance always has to be at the forefront of any of these dealing with change. But it's now, and that's affecting a lot of people outside of mandates. There's even that change of going back to something that you may no longer want to go back to, or a lifestyle that you no longer have any time for.
Well, think about this. Pre-COVID, if you were to get a notification from the government to say, tomorrow, all the schools are going to be closed, right? And that notification comes out at 4 p.m. Now, that happened to us here in Queensland. Yeah. I've got a little girl at school, first year at school, and at 4:30 p.m, we had a notification come out that all the schools the next day would be closed. Now, pre-COVID, that would have created utter chaos, complete chaos.
Yeah.
But it just seemed to kind of go, everyone just went, oh, okay, it's just another closure, it's another lockdown, it's another day we've got to organise Zoom meetings, work from home, put the kids in front of the laptop to get some work done. It just seemed to be something now that people adjusted to very quickly. Now that may be a good thing or a bad thing, but also, if you can take things as an opportunity. I'm not saying that was a good thing that happened. I'm just saying that it's amazing what we can get used to.
Yeah, I did see some really different opinions from parents about that particular show. Some of them were like, oh, well, they've been doing, this has been happening for a couple of years anyway, it's normal. And then some were like outraged, oh, they've only just gone back to school.
Exactly.
And so everybody's experience is going to be different.
That's the thing, it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
The first term of school this year in Australia has been disrupted by COVID lockdowns. Schools delay their opening, and then we've had closures because of floods, and then we've had closures because of weather. It's a very confusing and highly changeable environment that we're living in.
So we haven't really had to this scale, it has not happened, not in my lifetime, of this change. So if we're going to be talking about how to deal with change, then how do you even deal with just what happened that day when you get a text to say school? Like, if we have to live like that every day, anticipating something that's going to have a big impact on our day.
Exactly.
Then how do we...
And then it depends on your circumstance. So for some people, that's really easy. Okay, well, it's like, okay, well, I can just zoom in and log into the network on the laptop at home and everything's okay. I can deal with that really easily. Some people, like I'm in the trade sector, so tradies, then I've got to work out, well, what am I going to do with the kids all day? They can't just put them in front of the computer and... so I actually had a stage where my staff member couldn't make it to work because they couldn't send their child to school. So I was like, Sean, I can't make it, mate. So I'm sorry. I've got to organise something to do for my son. So then, I was put out, my customers were put out. It's amazing how quick people get used to things. So for some people, it was really easy to deal with. With other people, it was a little bit difficult.
Well, anyone is dealing with any instability.
I think that we don't. Sometimes that it's hard to see from another point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why we do what we do, Sean, because we want to present all of those different views, because you can get really, well, like everyone, you're just dealing whatever you're dealing with in your situation, but that means that you don't really hear about what strategies people are using to deal with change, or what they're going through, or how things are impacting on them.
So what's your next piece of advice?
So I want to talk about values, and I think that for me, when I started to really heal as a person, is when I got really clear on my values, which I also see as boundaries. So, when I didn't place great value on myself, then I allowed people to treat me in a way that I would not allow them to treat me now, or say things to me that I would not accept, or I would work in employment situations with bullies for bosses, and now I would never do that. So my values have completely changed over the last 10 years particularly, and now I live them, and they're like a framework for me. And I'm always interested, and particularly when I was working with coaching clients, and no one was really sure or clear, or they could never tell me what they really valued, their top 3 values. And a lot of the times it was because it came from their parents or their upbringing, or they belonged to someone else. And we've been taught as a society in a lot of ways to value security above all else. And I think that's where a feeling of a loss of control, particularly over the last 2 years, has come from, because I've still been coaching the first 18 months of the pandemic, and that's what was coming up, was I don't feel I have any control because I have to do certain things in order to meet my value of security.
Right, okay.
Which, when you place value on one particular thing, can then compromise all your other values.
Right.
And so it's finding that, again, equilibrium with your values.
Okay.
And a lot of the time, if you've got kids to feed and mortgage to pay, then you have to value security.
Sure.
And the consequences of what comes with that. So that getting clear on your values doesn't mean there's not consequences of your values. but it's really good to actually know what they are and that they don't belong to someone else, or they haven't been instilled in you from.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think that's probably, to me, what people at this point, from what my own personal experience has been, is go, well, okay, get a piece of paper out and like, well, what's my top 3 values? How am I living these values? What kind of things am I doing at the moment that don't support those values? Because, yeah, then you'll know, you will have clear boundaries moving forward with your life, knowing that you've got an inner guidance system and it's driven by your values, and that's your decisions in your life are based on that.
Yeah, and again, I think when people really face adversity and face challenging times is when they really do work out what their values are. I mean, I'm sure if you asked anyone in Lismore at the moment who was really struggling to, you know, with water inundating their house and in some cases very life-threatening situations, I'm pretty sure they would really work out, they would have their values really worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be, so survival is up there on Maslow's, you know, like hierarchy of needs, that everything would be about keeping yourself alive.
Yeah, but it'd also be about family and it'd also
community.
be about community.
And we have absolutely seen that in Lismore, Sean, because of the difficulty in finding volunteers there, where absolutely the community has done the majority of the work.
Well, I haven't had a problem finding volunteers because people have just volunteered. They've gone out and they've got in their boat and they've got a shovel and they've got a hose and they've got a gurney and they've gone out there and helped them.
The government hasn't
exactly
stepped in and has it, and so the community went, okay, well, this is what we have to do, and that community valued.
Yeah, there's obviously been some issues around the government support there.
Yes, yeah.
But as far as community support goes, it's very heartwarming to see.
Absolutely, and you know what, I believe that's the future, where if that trust has been eroded in government, and that's very clear in what is coming out in surveys, and I think that's been happening for a long time, but right now it's at its lowest point. It doesn't matter what party we're talking about, political party, there is a trust in authority and government of any sort is at its lowest levels.
Yeah.
And to me, that means there is a great opportunity there for
communities to come together.
And that really is then, which means that we have to reconnect with each other. And regardless of what has happened in the last 2 years, we look to what's happening with the floods, where people came together. And of course, you and I lived through this in 2011 with the Brisbane floods, where I was volunteering for St. Vinny's, and everything was about helping each other. And you did not care where someone was from or what they'd had or what they'd done. You really, that's what it came down to.
Yeah.
And I believe that is the way forward. But we're stuck in that place with, after all of this division in the last 2 years, no matter where your views were or what you've been doing, we can't continue to, if no one trusts the authorities in government and we don't trust each other.
We don't trust the information.
Where does that leave humanity?
So we've got to find our own values.
We've got to find our own values, and we've got to come together as a community. And I use the term self-govern because first you have to govern yourself. That's a very good point. You have to self-govern, which is, getting clear on your values and your beliefs and using your inner authority. And that's, what that means to me. And then it's putting your oxygen mask on first. So you've got to get clear on yourself, and then creating a community. Yeah. Which you can rely on without government telling you how you can do that. And that is, I think, how we heal from the last 2 years.
Yeah. And that comes down to trust as well. Trusting your neighbours, trusting your family, trusting your mates.
Yeah. And I think I genuinely feel that people are ready for that to happen again, because that is our nature as humans. We couldn't exist as humans if we all thought that we were all turn on each other or, you know, I mean, I've travelled the world, Sean, and I can tell you, doesn't matter what country you go to, people are inherently good and they want to be connected and they want to help and express their emotions as a human being in an open way and come together.
Great. What else have you got?
Well, there's a big thing that I used to be quite resistant about, and that is acceptance.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm resistant to that is because sometimes being asked to accept something means shut up and suppress what you've been through. And that's where I have acceptance comes after the process of going through all the emotions and the trauma and the feelings of that and the forgiveness. There's a whole lot of steps to acceptance. And then what is it you're accepting? Are you accepting a government intervention in your life every day, telling where you go, what you can do? Is that accepting? Is that the new normal? I don't know if acceptance is an appropriate word anymore to do a change.
I think to have real acceptance is that you've got to really understand that you're not going to be right all the time. Just by accepting that helps you accept other points of view. I mean, you got to. I think, you know, the proverb of the Buddhist proverb is, "Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Am I wrong?" is always a really good question to ask.
Yeah. Yes.
Ask it 3 times. So you might have your views and opinions. They might even be passionately held, and they might even be very well researched and things like that. And you can definitely argue your case, and you can definitely give your opinion and point of view. But I think acceptance is really trying to think, well, am I wrong? Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Asking that, finding out what other people are going to talk to you about, and seeing where that acceptance is.
And I don't think we're having those conversations, because that is a really different way of looking at acceptance, Sean. And that's interesting, because I don't actually think people are talking about things that they need to talk about particularly what's been happening over the last couple of years. So and I don't think it's a conversation that we're all fatigued from talking about things that have happened over the last 2 years, but it's finding that middle ground of pretending nothing happened. And
yes. I think that's what most people are starting to do. It's like, well, let's just ignore everything. Yeah. Let's pretend it's all over and we can just move on. There's a level of acceptance there.
Yes.
And most people will get through like that.
Yes. And that is absolutely appropriate for people who can do that. But what happens to the people who want to have their experience witness and voice and out there and want to talk about it and talk about their grief and talk about the changes and the feelings they've gone through? Where does that go? If many people are saying, it's all back to normal, you know, we need to move on. And a lot of people will say, well, that's gaslighting. And that may not be the intent of that person saying that, but it's all about how that person perceives that. And it's okay if you know that there is someone you can talk to or go to if you're not feeling like you just want to get on with things. And I think that's everything in life, right? Where if someone's saying to you, oh, you should just get over that, or you should just move on from that, and that's not really what you feel like doing, then that's when you repress yourself and your emotions and your feelings. So I think that it's okay if you're in conversation and someone doesn't want to talk about it or they just want to move on. That's like, yes, I think you would say, I accept that that's your view. And then you find another area where you can voice your opinion and be heard, and that might be a whole different friendship group. I mean, some people have different sets of friends that they talk to about things, or or do, that would apply here. But if you have someone, if you do want to talk about things or you have concerns, even now, if things that are going on that are still being imposed in your life, then you have to have an outlet for that. You have to have your voice heard.
Yeah, I think acceptance is a really big part of dealing with change. What else you got there, Melanie? What's our other top tips dealing with change?
Well, celebrating the positives.
Okay.
And I think no matter what is going on, we always have room for that. Like
Absolutely.
there always has to be, as we like to the listeners, Sean and I are just in this beautiful apartment looking out over the ocean. I mean, right now in this moment,
It's luxury.
it's
Melanie.
luxury and it's
Here we
beautiful.
are, living it up.
Living it up, and we absolutely have to have that gratitude and connection to that, because you cannot stay in one state for too long. You can still have those underlying feelings of things aren't right or I need to make some change, but you cannot be in that state 24/7. You've got to have breathers and moments where you just go, this is actually perfect for me in this moment.
So what's some of the positive things that you've taken out over the last couple of years?
So for me, I actually feel really strong. Like it's really strong emotionally, and that is not how I was even last year. But for some reason in the last month, I've just got to a position where I'm like, okay, I can handle anything now. Like I really am, and I've gone through a lot of my life. I mean, overcoming a traumatic brain injury, and I've gone through a fair bit, but I don't know why, but I just feel like, okay, well, I had all this stuff thrown at me in the last 2 years. And look, prior to COVID, I was cruising, for the first time in my life. I've had a few years of just, this is so nice to not have any hits coming. Mm-hmm. But, so I feel really strong. I feel like there's a gap there to allow more different friendships in, different experiences. I feel really excited about new possibilities. They might be a long way off, but there's something about the uncertainty of the opportunity that may be out there, or some type of new system or new way of that's coming after this. That's what I have hope. I have hope.
Okay, great.
So yeah, and I'm really, again, gratitude's a big thing. I still do my 3 things I'm grateful for every night before I go to sleep. Been doing that for 12 months now, so it's my 12 months mark. And that really helps me. I mean, that just changes your whole, like if people try it, then you'll even just notice the changes in your body. So I still have all that. And even on a beautiful day when there's sunshine, I'm like, this is what a great
Sure.
day. Like it's simple stuff.
Absolutely.
Because some of the stuff that's going on at the moment, like you have to bring it down to that level.
Yeah.
And it's not hard when you actually sit to think about things to be grateful of.
Yeah. Well, from my point of view, I mean, I went through a radical change of career from what I used to do and what I call my past life now. Really, it does feel like that. And so the positives for me is that I've really been able to focus on building up my little business that's allowed me to be outside every day, be in nature, be physically active all the time. So I've really taken that as a positive. And although we haven't been able to travel and have the freedom to be able to go to, distant lands or, travel overseas or anything like that, I've been lucky to spend a lot of time in my local area and have done some really amazing things and seen some really great things locally. Just recently I was at, a tiny little island in Moreton Bay that really, if it wasn't for the pandemic, you wouldn't think of going there because you'd be thinking, well, where could I fly to or where could I go for a long weekend? But when you're sort of limited to the restricted area, you get to find out the little things in your community. Yep. And that's been a really big positive thing for me as well.
And just finally, what I would say that I do, that was once said to me and I was poo-pooed it, but then I thought, actually, it's true. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So then it's about taking action.
Right.
How do we take action to change something in our life that is not working for us, whether it's an emotional response or an actual job or a relationship or a house that you're living in, with the uncertainty that's going on, how do you take action? And for me, one of the biggest changes I made 5 years ago was actually changing states, like changing location. And that really worked for me. So it was a big, huge step into the unknown, but I trusted it and it really worked out for me. And I think with the uncertainty, it's been really hard for people to say, well, how do I take meaningful action to make change in my life when there is this?
Frightening.
It's frightening. There may still be things that you wanted to do that you can't do that would have helped you with that change. So that's what I think that this would be, great to finish off with. Well, how do you take action to make changes in your life, big or small, in the current environment, and working with that what's around the corner feeling?
Well, the way that I look at it, Melanie, and this comes to me through my meditation practice, and I've spent a lot of time meditating over the last 2 years, which has been another really positive thing for me, and I highly recommend our listeners. You and I are big advocates for it, and we've done an episode on meditation if you want to go back and check it out. But I highly recommend to all of our listeners to give it a try and give it a go. But one of the things that happens with meditation and the meditation practices and some of the teachings that you'll do if you're experimenting with different techniques and things like that is the law of nature. We've got all these laws, okay? We've got, laws about, business law and contract law and laws about parking and law. Our world is really ruled by all of these laws. But really, there's only one law that rules everything, and that's the law of nature. And nature will constantly change.
Yeah.
And so the only thing that we know for certain is things will be different.
Yes.
And I think that's a big thing for me on dealing with change, is that, well, I can fight and try and keep everything the same, but eventually that will break down. Things will change whether I like it or not. So, and I think that's part of that acceptance as well.
Yeah, and for me, going back to the meditation thing, a lot of times that's where I get my answers. Like, what action do I take next? I might even say that out aloud when I meditate, like, okay, what's the path forward to me? And it's not having the expectation it's going to be dropped in that particular moment, but it might come a few days later on.
Sure.
And that's what meditation strengthens your connection to your intuition, and that for me has always guided my life on what action to take next. And if I find that I get too much out of that practice and into fear mode, then I make choices that aren't in my highest good.
Yeah.
So that's another part of meditation, is getting that space to know, be guided as to what you should do next. And that's your internal guidance system.
Absolutely.
And that's what controls you, not anything else. And it's that trust that you will take the next step based on that gut feeling.
Yeah.
And that's where I have found meditation so transformative, for showing me which step to go to next, even if I have no idea where I'm going to end up, or even what one step is, 2, 3. Yeah, if I surrender to like just being guided there, it always works. And I still get resistant to it, and I can look back and like, okay, when I was resistant, then I started getting to fear. I'm like, my mind was chaos. It's like, which way do I go? So yeah, that's how I have taken back my power.
Well, I think that's a great way for us to finish up today. Mel, it's so great to catch up again,
really
to reconnect. Good. We really hope that all of our listeners are starting to get the opportunity to reconnect with friends and family, whether it's, within different states in Australia or across the world. We've got listeners from all around the world, so we hope that that's happening wherever you're living as well. And we hope that this is going to be a really positive experience for you to reconnect. Like we have, Mel. It's great to reconnect.
It's been great. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.